everybody, Colton here, and I think I have figured out how Avengers Endgame and Old Man Steve Rogers set up a huge plot point in Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars, and how Steve Rogers may have actually created Doctor Doom. In fact, I think that I have cracked the code on how not only Avengers Endgame, but Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and Captain America Brave New World may be the three most important films leading into Doomsday and Secret Wars. And I have a fun little Easter egg that does connect all of this back to Back to the Future.
So Back to the Future is a bunch of bullshit?
So, we need to discuss Chris Evans' confirmed return to the MCU, how this return connects to Old Man Steve Rogers and his relationship with Doctor Doom, and how this shield that Old Man Steve gave Sam Wilson is actually a multiversal artifact that was never created and can never be destroyed. It is what I am calling the shield out of time. So, at the end of Avengers Endgame, Steve Rogers embarks on a mission across the multiverse and various timelines to return the Infinity Stones that the Avengers gathered to undo Thanos' snap from Infinity War. Now, when they borrowed those stones, alternate realities were created.
Remove one of the stones, and that close splits. In this new branch reality, our world would be overrun. Millions will suffer.
Also,
you have to return the stones at the exact moment you got them. You're going to open up a bunch of nasty alternative realities.
So Steve is returning the stones to clip those nasty branches.
Don't worry, Bruce. Clip all the branches.
And this concept of branches, of course, would go on to be explored in Loki seasons 1 and 2. So when Steve goes on this mission, he does not have his shield. Remember, it was destroyed in the Battle of Earth, and I guess it's still around somewhere.
Somewhere under all this.
So we don't actually know the story of what it was like for Steve returning all of these stones. They really should have made this a series or a movie or make it part of Avengers Doomsday if you ask me. But hey, no one asked me. But seriously, did he have to put the ether back in Jane? Anyway, we can assume that in some way, shape, or form, Steve did return all of the stones to their proper place in time. But we know that instead of then returning to the platform that he was sent from, we learn that he actually traveled back in time to live a life with Peggy Carter. Now, according to the writers of Endgame, Steve returned to the past of the mainline MCU, and he has actually been living in the mainline MCU in the shadows for all of these years. And that would mean that Peggy's husband, that we hear mentioned several times, was actually Steve Rogers, which would mean that dude is making out with his niece.
Goodness gracious.
But the Russos, on the other hand, the directors of that film and the directors of Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, they say that Steve lived this life with Peggy in an alternate timeline, an alternate reality. Perhaps a reality that he himself, Steve, created. A reality that he created by time traveling. A reality that splintered off from the mainline MCU, just like one of those notorious branches that we talked about a second ago that were mentioned in Endgame and that we've seen in Loki. And I think the reality that Steve created was Universe 838, the very advanced and prosperous version of the MCU that we actually saw in Multiverse of Madness. Remember, that universe was home to the Illuminati.
The Illuminati will see you now.
The Illumawati?
Now, I really like the idea of this new universe where Steve lived a life with Peggy being a splintered timeline from that mainline MCU, because that makes it to where he truly is reconnecting with his version of Peggy Carter that he left behind when he went into the ice all those years ago. And this new timeline would be splintering from that point forward. But all of the stuff that happened between him and Peggy in the first Avenger when they fell in love, that is still canon to Universe 616 and Universe 838, which I think is way better than her just being some random Peggy that our Steve didn't actually know. This would also mean that the Peggy Carter that we all know from First Avenger, in this splintered reality, she would go on to take up the shield and become Captain Carter, but unfortunately have a brutal death at the hand of Wanda. But that does tie into our theory with Doom and why Steve will join Doom's team in Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. Just hang tight, we'll get there soon, I promise.
Shit getting out of hand now.
Now, another reason that I think it would make sense for Steve's new reality to be Universe 838 is because it's such an advanced society, likely meaning that they were able to avoid major setbacks that delayed progress. Setbacks that a time traveler like Steve Rogers could warn them about, such as Hydra's infiltration of S.H.I.E.L.D. Steve theoretically could have prevented most, if not all, of this timeline's major catastrophes, specifically wars, but in doing so, we think he created Doctor Doom. RDJ's Doctor Doom, a version of Tony Stark that went a very different path, a path that was rewritten and laid before he was even born. So, like I was saying, in Endgame, Steve doesn't show back up on that platform after returning the stones. We see him pop up on this bench, waiting with a shield to give Sam Wilson as he asks him to become the new Captain America. So let me explain how I think this old man Steve Rogers actually got his hands on a Captain America shield. No matter what universe Steve traveled to or created via splintering to live a life with Peggy, I think we can safely assume that he didn't take on the life of Captain America. But that doesn't mean that he stopped superheroing. Just like in the comics, Steve Rogers may have taken up the moniker of Nomad and actually kept a secret identity. And in this new reality, Captain America just might not exist. I mean, theoretically, if Steve returned to the exact right moment in history, just like with the Infinity Stones that he was returning, it would be as if he never left.
At the moment it was taken. So, chronologically, in that reality, it never left.
The splinter that Steve would then create would be this, one where the MCU continued as normal, he went down into the ice, he gets dug up, returns to being Captain America, joins the Avengers, you know the drill. But you could think of that as a more chaotic timeline, represented by this darker strand of time that we saw in Endgame. The mainline MCU could be categorized as one of those nasty timelines. I mean, that is a timeline where Bucky becomes the Winter Soldier, Hydra infiltrates S.H.I.E.L.D., Thanos commits a genocide. But in this other timeline, it would be like Steve Rogers never left while simultaneously placing the Tesseract at the bottom of the ocean and still saving the day. If Steve replaces himself and creates a new timeline, he becomes the Steve Rogers of that universe. A Steve Rogers who has the Super Soldier Serum and who was Captain America for a little while, but he is assumed dead. He is assumed to be at the bottom of the ocean with the Tesseract, but he is actually living a life, a secret life with Peggy Carter. Kind of like Batman at the end of Dark Knight Rises. We think that Batman blows up with that bomb over the ocean, but we find out that the autopilot was on and he is now living a secret life with Selena Kyle. Damn, this is exactly like Dark Knight Rises. If in this universe, Steve, sets up an autopilot or something because he knows what's going to happen, and then he is still able to sink the ship, but then get to still go be with Peggy, and that's the point that the Splinter is created. The mainline MCU is him going off and, doing the things that we see him do with the Avengers and all that, but this splintered timeline is him staying. Sorry, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole there, but another thing that's great about this theory is it takes away the possibility of a poor frozen Steve Rogers being at the bottom of the ocean while a variant of himself dances with Peggy and does other stuff with Peggy.
Woo! You all right? You want some juice?
And this could also be why in this universe, Peggy goes on to become Captain Carter, because remember, in universes that have a Captain Carter, like the ones we've seen in the What If series, there is no Captain America, and in his place we get a Captain Peggy Carter, which again fits in perfectly with Universe 838, which has a Captain Carter, not a Captain America. Now, a second ago I mentioned that this futuristic version of the MCU, Universe 838, likely was not plagued by things like war, allowing for society to advance. It's kind of like in that episode of Family Guy when Brian and Peter go to that alternate timeline where Al Gore became president instead of W. Bush.
With President Gore's universal health care, people are living much longer these days.
And with zero-tolerance gun control and a strong, well-funded educational system, there's no street crime.
Now, if 838 is a universe without war, then how the hell would the Starks have ever made their fortune? Answer, they wouldn't have. Howard Stark in Captain America the First Avenger, as well as in the recordings we saw of Howard Stark in Iron Man 2, we see a version of Howard Stark that had a more hopeful and peaceful view of the future. A future that looks a lot more like the one we see in Universe 838. And in a reality where Howard Stark and his genius weren't used for weapons manufacturing for endless war, and instead focused more so on his original vision of a utopia, we would likely see a better future, but a future where the Starks did not become super wealthy because progressive innovation that betters society doesn't pay nearly as well as warmongering military contracts. And a reality where the Starks aren't wealthy could create a reality where Tony Stark is very, very different. He never becomes Iron Man. You would think that a more peaceful, utopic type future would create a better Tony Stark, and it would be good that he never had to grow up under all of these various wars and whatnot, and that he was never a weapons manufacturer. But we have to remember, a crucial part of Tony's story is that he was a weapons manufacturer, and he has that turning point. He learns that lesson in that cave in the first Iron Man, and that is what makes him become Iron Man. But in a more utopic society, despite them perhaps not being these famous wealthy Starks, he could still be a very affluent and privileged individual who never has to go through any of these hardships like he does in the cave, meaning that he never becomes Iron Man. No, he is now set on a path to becoming Dr. Doom, a version of Stark who wants to protect this utopia from outsiders, those outsiders being the other universes and the impending incursion with Universe 616, the mainline MCU that we know is coming and which was caused by Doctor Strange.
Doctor Strange,
Can I help you?
you caused an incursion.
This version of Stark, aka Doom, whose Doom bots, or should I say Ultron bots, we have already met in Universe 838, and whose empty chair we saw here on the Illuminati dais, he will recruit Steve Rogers to join his Illuminati after most of the members were slaughtered by Wanda, including Steve's wife, Captain Peggy Carter. Steve will be furious with this other reality, his home reality, for leading to the death of Peggy, but now also causing an incursion that will kill everyone in both universes. Now, in this scenario, Doom will also recruit Wanda Maximoff, who, remember, was possessed by her 616 self and who was used like a puppet to kill all of her fellow heroes and her mentor, Professor Charles Xavier. Doom, with Wanda and Steve by his side, along with some other new members that I'm not going to go into naming right now, they will go to war with Universe 616 to save their own reality from destruction, and they will be determined to destroy Universe 616, just like they destroyed another reality that they almost collided with due to the actions of their Stephen Strange.
One night you called us all together, confessed that you had been dreamwalking. You, our friend, had caused the annihilation of another universe.
So, let me explain how all of this links back to that shield that Steve gives Sam. I think that once Doom and his Illuminati go to war with the 616 Avengers, our Avengers, in Avengers Doomsday. Also, hey, side note, it has been confirmed that in Captain America Brave New World, in that post-credit scene with the leader, when he talks about the others, he was talking about the Illuminati when he said the others. So that's yet another great piece of evidence for this theory and how it could be 616 Avengers versus 838 Illuminati. Anyway, Doom's Illuminati will fight the Avengers, led by Sam Wilson's Captain America. And Doom will be set on saving his reality and his reality alone, while the 616 Avengers will be looking for a compromise to save both worlds. And this is when, in a fight between Steve Rogers, who I think will take up the moniker of Nomad, and Sam Wilson's Captain America, we will see Sam convince Steve that he is in the wrong. At first, Steve will feel like he has no choice but to help Doom destroy the mainline MCU, Universe 616, because it is the only way to save 838, the universe where he and Peggy had a life together, and have children who are still alive and need their father to save them and their reality from being destroyed. In a lot of ways, even though 616 was this Steve's home universe, he actually got to live a life in 838, so he views that more so as his home and the one that he is going to protect. Anyway, I think the two will be fighting, Sam and Steve. They're going at it, and Steve's going to be kicking Sam's ass, but it's Sam who will ultimately win the fight. Not by force, but with a classic Sam Wilson, you need to do better speech, the type of speech that also brought down the Red Hulk. He'll be convinced by Sam that he and Doom are in the wrong, and he will use Steve's own line from Avengers Infinity War about how we don't trade lives to convince Steve to stop.
We don't trade lives, Vision.
And that is when Steve Rogers will snap out of his grief-stricken rage over Peggy, and he will accept Sam's idea of being able to save both worlds, even if it's a harder path and a less certain one. And after the two work together in Secret Wars to bring down Dr. Doom, I think we will see Sam give Steve his shield as a symbolic gesture to remind Steve of where he came from and the values and the moral compass that are represented by that shield and by Captain America. At first, Steve will refuse the shield, but Sam will wink and tell him that he can give it back to him later, and that's how this old man Steve Rogers will have gotten the shield in the first place that he would then travel back in time to give to Sam before kicking the bucket from old age in his own reality. And the reason he kept the shield all these years and is just now returning it before he dies is because following his face turn in Secret Wars, he will pick back up the mantle of Captain America in his reality in 838. So if Sam Wilson got the shield from Steve, but Steve got the shield from Sam, but Sam got the shield from
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Then that means the shield was never actually created. It is a multiversal artifact that transcends time and reality, much like the symbol of the shield itself and how it transcends time and reality. Poetic, isn't it? And this phenomenon is similar to that of the Johnny B. Good song in Back to the Future. Chuck Berry's brother hears Marty McFly playing the song, he calls his brother to listen on the phone, and that then inspires Chuck Berry to write the song that Marty McFly would then hear in the future. But Marty only knows the song to play it in the past because he's from the future and he heard Chuck Berry perform it, which means this song was never written. Barry got it from Marty, and Marty got it from Barry. And that's how Back to the Future ties to my theory. Well guys, that was a total recap of one of my many theories for RDJ's Doctor Doom and the upcoming Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars. Let me know your thoughts and theories down in the comments below and other stuff you would like to see me cover here on my personal channel, or hey, you can find me on Twitter or over on the Screen Crush YouTube channel as well. Until next time, bye!